From Indiana Jones sporting jeans in the 1930s to Russell Crowe flashing lycra under his Gladiator gear, costume blunders have a way of sneaking into even the biggest blockbusters. And remember the infamous zipper moments in Amadeus and the Young Victoria? Or how about Serena's off-the-wall graduation look in Gossip Girl? These wardrobe malfunctions have left actors cringing and viewers puzzled for years. But which mistake takes the crown as the most surprising? And how did they make it past so many eyes? Stay tuned, because the biggest blunders are about to be revealed. When Raiders of the Lost Ark hit theaters, it quickly became a classic. Indiana Jones, played by Harrison Ford, brought an adventurous spark to the screen. Every scene made you feel like you were right there in the 1930s. Well, almost every scene. There's a moment in the movie where you catch a glimpse of a crew member wandering around in the background. No big deal, right? But here's the funny part. He's wearing jeans and a t-shirt. In a movie set in the 1930s, seeing someone dressed like it's 1981 stands out like a sore thumb. Now think about it for a second. This was a massive production with lots of eyes watching every shot, yet this little slip made it through. It's kind of amusing, isn't it? You're totally absorbed in the storyline, surrounded by Nazis and ancient artifacts, and suddenly you see someone who looks like they just came from a local diner. Now let's switch gears to the epic story of Troy. This film tried hard to make you feel like you were in ancient Greece. The costumes were carefully chosen down to the smallest detail. But then, in one scene, you spot something odd behind Orlando Bloom's character. It's a pink parasol. The problem? Parasols, or umbrellas in general, weren't around back when the story of the Iliad was set. In the heat of battle, seeing a modern-day parasol feels out of place, like spotting a beach towel in a medieval castle. Maybe the filmmakers thought it blended into the background, but once you notice it, you can't unsee it. The parasol definitely adds a splash of color, but not in a historically accurate way. If there's one film that defined romance and tragedy, it's Titanic. And if there's one character who stole hearts, it's Rose, played by Kate Winslet. With her elegant costumes, iconic jewelry, and timeless beauty, Rose looked every bit the 1912 socialite. But there was a tiny, wandering detail in the film that caught some fans' eyes. Rose's beauty mark. The little mole was meant to be a part of her look, adding character to her face. But here's the twist. It didn't stay in one place. In some scenes, it was on the left side of her face. In others, it mysteriously switched to the right. It's the kind of detail you wouldn't catch unless you're watching closely. But for the sharp-eyed viewers, it's hard not to laugh at the unintended moving mole. Let's fast forward to Django Unchained, one of Quentin Tarantino's boldest movies. It's set in 1858, right before the Civil War, and follows the story of Django, played by Jamie Foxx. Everything about the film screams pre-Civil War era, except for one noticeable accessory: Django's sunglasses. Now, there's no denying that those shades made Django look super cool. But there's just one issue. Sunglasses like those weren't around in 1858, they have more of a 20th century vibe. But hey, Tarantino probably figured they fit Django's tough persona, and it seems like fans agreed. Django sunglasses became a hot fashion trend after the movie's release. It's funny to think about a cowboy sporting shades back in the 1800s, but somehow it worked for Django's character. Now let's talk about Gladiator, the film that brought the Roman arena back to life. Russell Crowe's character Maximus was a force to be reckoned with, charging into battle with raw power. The costumes, especially his leather kilt, added to the film's authenticity. But there's a moment that kind of breaks the illusion. During one intense fight scene, Maximus's costume rides up a bit, revealing something that definitely doesn't belong in ancient Rome: lycra shorts. Lycra, as you might know, is a modern fabric that helps athletes move more freely. While it makes sense for Crowe to have some added comfort during those action scenes, it's not exactly what the Romans wore. It's a funny visual when you think about it. Here's this fierce warrior, supposedly living in ancient times, but sporting something invented in the 20th century. Now, speaking of clothing choices that don't fit their time, we have Princess Diana, a style icon whose fashion decisions often carried more meaning than meets the eye. In real life, she famously avoided wearing Chanel after her split from Prince Charles because the brand's iconic intertwined C logo reminded her of Charles and Camilla, the woman he was involved with. However, in the film Spencer, there's a surprising moment where Diana is shown wearing Chanel. It's a glaring inaccuracy that stands out, considering how deeply personal her aversion to the brand was. Then there's The Doors, a film about the legendary band fronted by Jim Morrison. Set in the swinging 60s, the movie tried to capture the rebellious spirit of the time. But there was one notable slip. At one point, Morrison, played by Val Kilmer, sports a pair of Ray-Ban sunglasses that were actually released in the 1980s. It's a bit funny, right? You're watching Jim perform in a smoky club or wandering the streets of LA, and then, bam, he's wearing shades that weren't even invented yet. It's a small detail, but one that sticks out once you notice it. Now let's jump to a different kind of drama. Gossip Girl. The show was all about high fashion and high school drama in New York City, but even it wasn't free from costume blunders. Take Serena van der Woodsen's graduation outfit, for example. All her classmates are wearing the traditional caps, yet Serena decides to clip her tassel into her hair like a barrette. It's a bold choice, yes, but it's not exactly what you'd expect for a graduation ceremony. Imagine the scene. Rows of students in identical caps, and then there's Serena, standing out with her tassel-turned accessory. It's the kind of thing that perfectly fits Serena's character, always breaking the rules of tradition, but still makes you wonder how no one noticed this detail during filming. The Young Victoria is another film that aimed for historical accuracy, but stumbled over a modern detail. In this movie about Queen Victoria's early years, the filmmakers took great care to depict the fashion of the era. But there's one glaring issue. The close-up shots of the back of the women's dresses reveal the seam lines of zippers. The problem? Zippers wouldn't be invented until about 10 years after the film's setting. Seeing a zipper on a 19th century gown is like spotting a digital watch in a period drama. It's just not supposed to be there. You might not catch it on the first watch, but once you see it, it's hard to ignore. In My Girl, we see a different kind of wardrobe-related error, though this one's more about an object than clothing itself. The main character, Vada, proudly shows off a mood ring that changes color depending on body temperature. It's a cute detail that adds to her quirky personality, but here's the catch. Mood rings didn't become popular until the 1970s, while the film is set in 1972. So the timing works, but the ring feels a bit ahead of its time for the story's setting. Now let's look at Braveheart, which is often criticized for its historical inaccuracies. But here's the surprising part. The film actually got a few things right about medieval women's clothing, which is pretty rare in movies set during that time. For instance, wimples were commonly worn by women in the 14th century, including young women. These head coverings were a symbol of status and modesty, so it was actually accurate to include them in the film. You might not think twice about this detail, but it's one of the few authentic choices in a movie filled with other anachronisms. However, Braveheart didn't get everything right. The film features princess seams in some of the women's dresses, which are seams that help shape a garment to fit snugly over the curves of the body. This sewing technique wasn't invented until the 19th century, so seeing it in the film is a bit like spotting a zipper in a Victorian gown. It doesn't belong. The medieval period had its own methods of shaping garments, but curved seams weren't one of them. Another detail that Braveheart managed to get right was the use of high necklines in the women's dresses. This is actually true to the early 14th century, where necklines tended to be higher and less revealing than what modern audiences might find appealing. It's a subtle touch, but one that adds a bit of authenticity to the film's portrayal of medieval women. It's a rare win for a movie that's often mocked for its inaccuracies. But while Braveheart deserves some credit for its accurate necklines, there's one big wardrobe blunder that's hard to overlook: the kilts. The film is packed with scenes of rugged Scots wearing traditional kilts as they charge into battle. It makes for great cinema, but it's also historically off by a few centuries. Kilts weren't invented until the 1720s, making it impossible for William Wallace and his men to have worn them during the 1280s. It's a classic case of filmmakers choosing drama over historical accuracy. Sure, kilts might have been more comfortable and easier for the actors to wear during the epic battle scenes, but they also make the warriors look like they're wearing skirts centuries ahead of their time. Let's shift from the Highlands of Scotland to the refined world of Pride and Prejudice. Elizabeth Bennet, portrayed by Keira Knightley in the 2005 film, has no trouble speaking her mind and stomping through the English countryside. However, one part of her outfit stands out: rain galoshes. In one scene, Elizabeth is seen wearing them as she navigates through a muddy field. The problem? Rubber galoshes weren't invented until 1852, well after the time Jane Austen wrote her novel. Austen herself passed away in 1817, so the sight of Lizzie wearing rain boots feels more like a modern convenience than something authentic to her era. It makes you wonder if the filmmakers took a little liberty to keep Knightley's feet dry during filming. Next up, we're transported to the beaches of Pearl Harbor. Set in 1941, the movie aimed to capture the period's spirit through both the story and the fashion. In one scene, women sit on their luggage waiting to travel, dressed in beautiful period clothes. But here's where it gets awkward: their bare legs. At the time, it would have been considered scandalous for women to go without stockings or longer dresses. Even with the nylon shortage caused by World War II, women would often paint a seam on the back of their legs to create the illusion of wearing stockings. It's a small but telling detail that's missing in the movie. Now let's ride over to Seabiscuit, the film about the legendary racehorse and his jockey Red Pollard, played by Tobey Maguire. The film was well received and even nominated for multiple Academy Awards, but it had a major costume error: the helmet worn by Maguire's character. In the movie, Red Pollard wears a strapped helmet that was introduced years after Seabiscuit's racing days in the 1930s and 40s. Back then, jockeys wore a simpler cap without the modern safety strap. Maybe the filmmakers chose the newer helmet for safety reasons, or maybe it was just a missed detail. Either way, it's hard not to notice once you're aware of it. There Will Be Blood, starring Daniel Day-Lewis as the ruthless oil tycoon Daniel Plainview, is next on our list. The film is set in 1898, with gritty scenes depicting the harsh reality of the oil industry at the time. But there's a curious detail that sticks out for those with sharp eyes. Plainview's boots have a waffle-patterned sole. This sole design wasn't created until much later, making it unlikely for anyone in the 1890s to wear boots with such a tread. It's the kind of mistake that's easy to miss, but it shows how even the most detailed films can let a bit of modern style slip in, even under the feet of the characters. Next, we have a classic from the 1950s, The Ten Commandments. This epic film tried to bring ancient Egypt to life on the big screen, complete with elaborate costumes and set designs. But it had its fair share of inaccuracies. For starters, there's the use of turquoise, which was not commonly available in ancient Egypt. It wasn't just the color that was off, though. In one scene, Anne Baxter's character wears an outfit that seems to have an underwire, a fashion invention that certainly didn't exist in biblical times. It's a funny visual once you think about it, especially since the film tries to take itself very seriously. Baxter's character, Nefertiti, was supposed to look like an Egyptian queen, but she ends up looking more like a 1950s Hollywood starlet. Moving from ancient Egypt to 18th century Europe, we arrive at Amadeus. This 1984 film tells the story of the musical genius Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. It aims to capture the lavish costumes of Mozart's time, but it makes a big zipper slip. Literally. Zippers weren't invented until the late 19th century, but the film shows several dancers sporting these modern fasteners. You'd think such a glaring mistake wouldn't make it into a movie about the 1790s, yet there they are, zipping through time. Some argue that the movie takes other creative liberties, like exaggerating Mozart's wild temperament, so maybe the zipper oversight isn't surprising. Next, we travel to The Battlefield of Glory, a film about the Civil War that captures the struggles of African-American soldiers in the Union Army. It's a gritty and powerful story, but one moment stands out for its sheer anachronism: an extra wearing a digital wristwatch. Yep, a digital watch somehow made it into a movie set in the 1860s. It's hard to believe this mistake wasn't caught during editing, given how obviously modern it is. From a historical drama to a classic musical, let's dance over to Singin' in the Rain. This beloved film, set in the 1920s but released in 1952, is filled with catchy songs and lively performances. But there's one costume choice that's a bit too modern for the time it portrays. Debbie Reynolds' character Kathy Selden wears a lovely pink outfit that fits better in the 50s than the roaring 20s. The style, color, and cut are all more in line with the fashion of the film's production era than the one it's set in. Now let's hop back to the 1950s, this time for real, in Back to the Future. Marty McFly's performance of Johnny B. Goode is one of the most iconic scenes in the film, as he plays Chuck Berry's hit song at a high school dance in 1955. But there's a small problem. The guitar he's using, a Gibson ES 345, wasn't made until 1958. It's a minor 3-year difference, but given that this is a time travel movie, you'd think they'd pay extra attention to historical details like this. Still, the scene is so fun and filled with energy that the inaccurate guitar can be forgiven. Let's stick with the 80s and check out Teen Wolf. This film, featuring Michael J. Fox as a teenager who transforms into a werewolf, has a legendary wardrobe malfunction of its own. In one scene, an extra is seen cheering on a basketball game, but her pants are unzipped. It's a blink and you'll miss it moment, but once you spot it, it's hard to ignore. The extra quickly zips up her fly, but the blooper still made it into the final cut. This mistake has since become a pop culture joke, referenced in everything from interviews to TV parodies. Then there's Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, where fans were in for a surprise during the Yule Ball scene. In the books, Hermione Granger wears a beautiful blue dress, but in the movie it's pink. The pink dress is lovely and fits the magical atmosphere, but it's still a major departure from the original book description. Now we come to a sci-fi classic, The Terminator. In this 1984 film, Arnold Schwarzenegger plays a time-traveling cyborg sent from the future. The opening scene is intense, with the Terminator arriving in 1984 in a flash of light, completely unclothed. While the scene is dimly lit, the lack of clothing is meant to show that the Terminator has just been sent through time. It's an iconic moment in film history, but for viewers with high-definition screens, it's easy to see more than director James Cameron might have intended. It's a wardrobe malfunction that's a bit different from the others, but still manages to make this list. Next up is Bad Boys 2, the 2003 action-packed film featuring Will Smith and Martin Lawrence. In the chaotic final act, Gabrielle Union's character, Sid, gets into a fight with the villain. During the scuffle, her dress slips slightly, causing a brief moment of exposure. It's the kind of blink-and-you'll-miss-it blooper that's hard to spot unless you're really paying attention. Still, it's surprising that it wasn't caught during editing, considering how fast-paced and explosive the scene is. In Closer, the 2004 romantic drama starring Natalie Portman, there's another wardrobe slip. During a tense conversation between Portman's character Alice and Clive Owen's character Larry, Alice's bra begins to slide out of place. It's a subtle but noticeable moment that wasn't meant to be part of the scene. Like many other bloopers, it's easy to miss unless you're really focused on the details. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below about your favorite movie blooper. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss out on our next deep dive into film goofs. Thanks for watching.